Hey everyone, welcome, welcome. I'm not sure who else in here. I'm never quite sure how to do this. It's still very weird for me. So anyways, just to get started, so my name is Axel from Get Speaking English, here today from lovely Canada, and today we're going to be talking about the future. This lesson in particular is going to be looking at some questions, example questions that you might find on the B2 first, the C1 advanced exams, but we're also going to sort of discover some vocabulary, things of that nature along the way. Um, so if you're here, feel free to say hi in the chat. That would be really fantastic. Let me know that if you're out there or not. I know there's a bit of a delay. Anyways, right. So we're going to be checking out, right, feature for the B2 first, C1 advanced exam. All right. And so just a heads up who this lesson is for. It's aimed specifically at preparing students for the B2 first of the C1 advanced exams. However, obviously a lot of these phrases and words, they're going to be really helpful for other exams as well. So for example, I know I have a lot of students who are also preparing for IELTS, so they would be helpful on that exam. Also TOEFL as well. Also for various general English exams, since especially the future is a very common subject that might come up on an exam. And also, this is fantastic for those who are looking to reach an upper intermediate to an advanced level of English. All right, perfect. All right, and just a heads up about what we're going to do today. So we're going to be looking at some useful vocabulary for talking about this topic, the future. We might look at some ideas about what will come up when we're talking about this, but also collocations, some key verbs that you'll be able to use. We're going to review some tenses for talking about the future because I know it can get a bit difficult. And then we're going to look at some different parts of the exam together and sort of brainstorm ideas about what we can say about those questions. And then finally, if we have some time, I have some phrasal verbs as well we can check out. And as always, I will share the notes on Discord. And also, if I remember, I'm going to put this on YouTube as well, so you'll be able to check it out on YouTube as well. All right, and feel free to participate in the chat. Say hi if you'd like. Because we are going to try to brainstorm together if we can, and that'll be great. All right, so first things first, so we're talking about the future. What kind of sort of subtopics might come up about this topic? And again, feel free to add your ideas in the chat. I mean, obviously, I think talking about the future, technology is definitely a topic that might come up. Speaking about technology, there's also artificial intelligence, right? Also automation, maybe, as we're using more artificial intelligence, robots and things to do tasks that were previously done by people. Another thing that commonly comes up maybe is like climate change and like energy. Obviously how to like get energy, things of that nature. Potentially also space exploration as well. potentially also transportation. That could be something that would come up as well. I mean, there's so many different things, right? Lifestyle, maybe. Oops. Culture. Lifestyles and cultures are going to change as we become more connected with one another and due to globalization, right? Potentially also communication and media. Yeah. Thinking back too about, artificial intelligence and technology, maybe also security and privacy. Those might be sort of ideas that would come up as well. And obviously, our evolution too, right? Human evolution, space exploration, find new planets to go to in the future, all sorts of things. Alright, great. So let's brainstorm then some collocations about the future. So obviously we're talking about collocations, we're talking about either 2 words or sort of a set, like 3 or 4 words that are always commonly used together. So for example, let's try to think of some collocations for the word future. And again, feel free to put your ideas in the chat so we can brainstorm together. If I could think of a few examples, sort of off the top of my head, there's maybe foreseeable future. So we might say in the foreseeable future. And when we're talking about the foreseeable future, that's sort of the future that we could imagine, basically. So for example, obviously we're thinking about the future in relationship to what we know now, right? So what we can imagine, what we can see. So as far in advance as we can see, as far in advance as we can imagine, that would be the foreseeable future. So, maybe it's, likely that remote work will continue to be very popular in the foreseeable future. Since it's proven to be very productive, right? So obviously, I don't imagine that stopping anytime soon. So I can imagine that continuing in the foreseeable future. Maybe also, the immediate future or the not too distant future. So in a timeline that's very short between now and the future, right? So for example, immediate future might be something that's going to come up very quickly. So maybe we could, as an example, we could say, in the immediate future, I'm going to be very busy because I'm working on a lot of projects at work. So that could be something that we could do. So the immediate future, so like next week, next few weeks, I'm going to be very busy. Maybe some other collocations that commonly come up. We'll hear about, like the distant future or the long-term future. So if we're talking about the distant future, then we're talking, many years in the future. So distant future, many years from now. And if we're talking about the long-term future, we're talking about like the future, sort of like from now for a very long time in the future. So for example, we might say, so for distance future, we might say, so in the distant future, we might live on another planet, something like that. So very far away in the future, we might do that. But if I'm thinking about the long-term future, I'm thinking about between sort of now and a period of time sort of in the future. So for example, it's like I need to prepare for my long-term future, so I'm thinking about going to school. So if I go to school, then obviously that'll put me in a good place for the long-term future. So for the rest of my life, maybe I will be in a much better place because of that. Alright, so distant future, long-term future. So those are great. If we think positively, maybe, for example, we could talk about like a better or a bright future. Maybe like exciting or promising future. Prosperous as well. Successful. If we're prosperous, that means that we're doing well. Usually, maybe financially, economically. So, for example, I'm hoping to have a prosperous future ahead of me. So a future that's going to have lots of money, be really well, where I'll be really great financially, economically, and doing really well. Also promising future, again, where I have success, right? Doing really well. Exciting, obviously, if we're talking about an exciting future, is something exciting, that means that it's really maybe interesting or full of surprises, right? If we're talking about a bright future, then, you know, really optimistic, and really well, like really great. And obviously, if we want a better future, that would be an improvement. So if we're looking for a better future, we want to hopefully make some improvements so that we're in a bit better situation in the future. All right, perfect. Also on the downside of things, so the negative side, you might talk about having maybe an uncertain or an unknown future. So that might be something. So if something is uncertain or if something is unknown, we can't predict at all. And obviously, if something is uncertain, that means that there's a lot of like unpredictability there. It's really hard to know what will happen. And potentially also you might hear people talk about like a bleak or a grim future. And these are kind of great adjectives. If something looks bleak, it seems rather maybe like kind of like empty and not too great. Yeah, not a lot going on there. And then grim is almost even a bit more extreme. So really worrying, without hope. doesn't look good at all. You know, so my future is looking pretty grim, we might say. Yeah, so if it's not looking good, those are two ways that we can talk about it. Alright. So how about some verbs that we might use for talking about the future? So verbs for talking about the future. And if you have any ideas, I want to throw them out in the chat. Or if you can come up with any examples as well, that would be fantastic too, so we can brainstorm together. So one verb that sort of comes in my mind, one that comes in to my mind is you might foretell the future. And if we foretell the future, we're going to say what will happen in the future. So for example, you know, no one can foretell the future with 100% accuracy, you know, none of us, we can make guesses, right? But nobody can know for sure, right? Another thing that we might say is that you might look into something, so for the future. So, to look into the future. Hey, welcome, Amar. Welcome. It's great to see you. Yeah, so we could look into the future, maybe. And typically if you look into something, you're actually researching. So if, sorry, not look into the future, but if you look into something, you're usually researching. So we want to find out some information, so you would look into something, and then obviously you would use that knowledge in the future to help inform your decisions in the future. So maybe like you know, scientists are looking into new technologies that will help reduce carbon emissions, maybe something like that. So they're researching technologies, and that would be really helpful for our future. We could also use, you know, to predict something, or to predict the future, or to predict an outcome. Oops, an outcome. An outcome, that's gonna be sort of the result of something. So for example, you know, it's hard to predict what will happen in the future, but we could make some good guesses based on current information, maybe. Or, you know, I predict in 5 years, I predict in 5 years I'll live in another country. Maybe I'm working towards that, and that's something that I envision in my future. Yeah, also see, you know, we also talk about seeing the future, you know, so if you see something, you maybe like envision something or imagine it. So for example, many people see, let's see, a lot of people see themselves having, you know, a lot of people see themselves having maybe more money in the future or something. Or I could see myself working as a teacher for a while. So I could imagine myself, I could envision myself doing this thing for a while. So that would be another thing too. And then also another sort of collocation that comes up often, will see into something. If you see into the future, so this is going to be like to predict the future, kind of like. So for example, you know, they are trying to see into the future to find out what's in store, maybe. So they try to predict the future, or I can't see into the future. I, don't have a crystal ball, so I have no way of predicting the future. So I might say something like that. But yeah, we see into the future. We're trying to envision what it's going to be like. Alright, so let's talk really quickly about some tenses. And I actually have a bit of a quiz here about tenses. So we're actually going to think together, and maybe what I'll do is I will give you guys maybe about 30 seconds to see about filling in these blanks with like the correct form of the verb. So the most appropriate form of the verb. So for example, the first one here we have, by this time next year, from university, I think it something this afternoon, so I'll bring an umbrella just in case. We time to visit all the museums, but we'll do our best to see as many as possible. If you study hard, you something the exam with flying colors. And then finally, she something to Europe next summer to visit her family. So I'll give you maybe like 15-20 seconds. Think about the best verb to put in these gaps. And I'm gonna sip my coffee. And then we'll review and we'll check the answer. Alright. So I'm going to put them in, and then we will discuss our answers and see how we did. So the first one, so I think by this time next year, I'll have graduated from university. So I think it will rain this afternoon, so I'll bring my umbrella just in case. We won't have time to visit all the museums, but we'll do our best to see as many as possible. If you study hard, you'll pass the exam with flying colors. And she's traveling to Europe next summer to visit her family. Alright, so let's talk about why. Why these answers are the answers. So the first one, we have a great, basically future perfect event, because we're talking about something, an action, right? So future perfect for something, like an action, or an event that will be finished before another point in time. So in this so here, right, we're talking about by this time next year. So by this time next year, so a year from now, this will have already happened. So we always want to use the future perfect for talking about something that will be finished before another point in time. Here, number 2, you think it will rain. Oops, I've graduated. There we go. Number 2, there we go. I think it will rain this afternoon, so I'll bring my umbrella. So typically, we're going to want to use will with any sort of like those little that clauses, like I think that or I believe that. If we're thinking about the future, then often we'll use will plus verb. So it will rain, so it's just like a future, simple future. So I think it will rain this afternoon, so I'll bring my umbrella just in case. Alright, fantastic. Then, obviously, you won't have time to visit all the museums, but we'll do our best to see as many as possible. So won't, obviously, this is like the negative form of will, right? So will not is won't. We could potentially also put just simple present here. So for example, we don't have enough time. Oh, sorry, we don't have time to visit all the museums. So this would be fine as well, so simple present. But here we are stating a fact. Alright, so here it's more future-oriented. We won't have time to visit all the museums, whereas here it's more just like a fact. So we don't have time. We don't have time, so we could say that as well. Both of those are fine. Then obviously here, so the 4th one, it's a classic example of, like the first conditional. So if we do this one thing, if we do this, then this other thing will happen. So you'll pass the exam. So classic future conditional, or first conditional. One thing will happen provided that another thing happens. So if you study hard, you'll pass the exam, and that'll be really great. And then finally, last one here we have, she is traveling to Europe next summer to visit her family. So she's traveling. So here I have a present continuous, which we often use for talking about confirmed plans and arrangements, right? So for confirmed plans and arrangements, so for example, and typically anything that you've made with another person, so especially those made with other people, we would use the present continuous. So for example, talking about weddings or appointments, arrangements, maybe dates, if you're going out with someone, or we're seeing a movie this weekend, we would use the present continuous or present progressive for those as well. And they're really great. So, and just another really quick extra bonus question. Because there is some flexibility in the future, some of the tenses sort of overlap. Which of these can we also use be going to plus verb for? So plus verb for. So be going to plus verb for. So we could use this for here, potentially. We could put it here. So for example, I think it's going to rain this afternoon, so I'll bring the umbrella. Typically here we'll use this form more to talk about predictions based on evidence. So for example, it might be really common to be like, oh, I see some dark clouds in the future, or sorry, I see some dark clouds in the distance. It's going to rain. So I see the clouds, I have a pretty good idea that it's going to rain, so I would use that form there. We could also potentially use it here as well. So maybe I'll just put a little check mark here. Here as well. So it's a little wordy, but we could say we're not going to have time to visit all the museums, but we'll do our best to see as many as possible. So there's one as well. So we're not going to have time to visit all museums. Again, really wordy, but it's possible to say. We can also use it in the first conditional phrases. So we could put it here as well. Another little thing. Here we go. So for example, if you study hard, you are going to pass the exam with flying colors. So there's another one too. You're going to pass the exam. So we could use it here. And then finally, we can also use it here with, instead of the present continuous. So for example, she is going to travel to Europe next summer to visit her family. So we could use it here because we also use to go, or is going to do something for intentions, basically. Right, so to be going to plus verb for intentions. So just a little disclaimer, however, though, this sounds very, very, very certain. It sounds like you've bought the ticket, you've made all the arrangements, everything is good to go, you are sure to go. Whereas this seems a little more like you have a plan, but it doesn't necessarily indicate that it's set in stone and that you're really going to do it. So this is very, very, very firm, whereas this is less firm. But again, very common to use going to plus verb to talk about our plans and things that we're planning on doing. All right, great. So let's maybe look at some part one questions now then. So obviously during part one of this exam, this is sort of the more, it's kind of a warm-up, basically, I like to describe it as. So during part one of the B2 first, C1 advanced exam, you'll get to answer some questions, and at this point, because the exam is done with a partner or two people, if it's at the end of the day, at this point you do not interact with your partner. So these questions are always going to be about you, about your experiences, about your opinions. So they're always going to be things that are very familiar to you, that are going to be about you and about your life, so directly relevant to you. So for example, maybe they're going to be about your friends and your family, your home, your community, maybe your country as well, hobbies, things that you do, things that you buy, things that you eat, you know, your pets, your likes, your dislikes, your opinions, so everything sort of all about you. Those are kind of the questions that you'll find here in this section. So let's brainstorm really quickly, maybe some part one questions. So again, like I said, everything is going to be kind of about you. So, you know, a common thing that comes up is your job, maybe. So for example, if we think about our job and a question about the future, maybe it could be, what job do you think you'll have 10 years from now? Or are you planning to do any traveling for your job in the future? Maybe something like that. Maybe about your friends and family. Do you plan to see any of your friends this weekend? Maybe so the upcoming weekend, right? Or what are you planning to do? What are you planning to do this weekend, right? So sometimes it's common to get a question about what you're going to be doing coming up. Maybe bigger questions, like how do you think your country will be different maybe 10 or 5 years from now? Or, what could your community do to improve itself in the future? Maybe something like that. Yeah, so a lot of questions sort of about you, thinking about hobbies and leisure activities. Is there something you'd like to, is there a hobby you'd like to take up in the future? So, and of course we always say to take up a hobby, as in to do that hobby. To take up a hobby, basically start doing a hobby. Yeah, so maybe there's something that you want to do in the future, so you might get asked about that as well. So lots of things that we could potentially come up here. So, yeah, and let's maybe just think of a couple, let's pick one or two maybe and think of a couple good examples, and feel free to write an example answer in the chat, and I'll give you a bit of a correction. We can add it to our list, but for example, what could your community do to improve, maybe to improve in the future? So here I could say maybe one thing my community could do to improve, maybe improve. Oh, so I actually live in a region that doesn't have any public transportation, so maybe one thing that my community can do in the future is set up some sort of bus system or public transportation system so that people without cars can get around more easily. So that would be something. So, and again, so part one questions, they're sort of warm-up questions. We don't want to say too much at this point, but we do want to give more than just a one-word answer. So, if anything, whenever answering questions, it's always best to answer the question directly. Answer the question directly, give a reason, and then if you need to expand more, finally maybe giving a relevant and logical example. So for example, yeah, so it's always best to say a couple things, but not too much. So another thing, maybe, let's see, let's take another one. Maybe what are you planning to do this weekend? So that would be another common thing, or another thing that you would just, maybe get when you're doing an English lesson, for example. Oh, what are your plans? Or what are you planning to do this weekend? So maybe you're a bit boring. Maybe you actually don't do you don't do much. We can always remember that these exams, they're not knowledge exams, they're exams about your English, right? So if you have nothing really planned, you can always kind of make up something if you'd like, or talk about something that you'd like to do. So let's see, what are you planning to do this weekend? So let's see. Well, to be honest, I don't have much planned, but I'd like to go for a walk if I can and see some of my friends. So that could be, a really quick way to do that question. If you don't have much planned, you could talk about something that you'd either like to do, or you could make up something as well. So something that you'd like to do. So another thing, making up, maybe, well, I'm planning to go for a walk with one of my friends, and we're going to get a coffee at the local cafe. So that could be an example of like a made-up answer. A made-up answer, yes. So, right. So these are, like I said, these are language tests. So exams about your English, not about how, real your answers are. So you can just make up something if you need. Yeah, so two sort of ways to sort of answer a question if you're not quite sure how to go about doing that. All right. So after having some having some questions for part one, then we're going to move on to part two. So at this point, this is part of the exam where it's a bit of a monologue. A monologue is where you have to sort of speak at length about something by yourself. In this case, you'll have to talk about some photos for 1 minute. And during this part of the exam, you're going to get a piece of paper, basically with 2 photos for the B2 first exam, or 3 photos for the C1 exam. And then you have to compare, you have to contrast the photos, so really important, contrast the photos, and then you have to answer the question or questions. So for B2 first, that's 1 question. C1 advanced, that's 2 questions. You have to do it all in 1 minute. And then after that, when you do yours, your partner will have to answer a question about your photos, and then vice versa. When they do the task, you'll have to answer a question about their photos. So here today, we're going to check out these ones here. So we have 3 pictures here, and then I have 2 questions here we're going to check out. So how might these activities be done differently in the future, and how might people benefit from the changes? All right. So first of all, let's think about how we're going to talk about these photos for starters. So we have to compare and contrast the photos, and then answer the questions. All right. So first things first, let's get some ideas about how to describe these photos. And I think let's just focus on maybe photo 1, photo 2, photo 3. Yeah, so let's look at some key vocabulary for maybe photo 1. All right. So if you have any ideas, throw them out there. We can generate our list of ideas here together. So first things first, obviously we can see that there's like doctors, maybe, or surgeons, right? So doctors or surgeons doing maybe some sort of operation, or doing a surgery. So surgery, that's like the activity, and then the surgeon is the person who does that activity. Obviously they're in some sort of room. We might call this an operating room. So typically they do operations or surgeries in an operating room. Also, right, so there's doctors, there's surgeons, there's also nurses. Usually there are nurses and other different kinds of people involved in a operation. Also, the person being operated on, we would call that a patient. So there's a patient, even though we don't really see the patient. And then obviously this operating room is probably in some sort of like establishment. So maybe a hospital. That would be like sort of the classic place to get an operation done. But maybe it could also be a medical, like a clinic or a medical facility. That'd be very generic, but yeah, so a clinic or a medical facility. So yeah, so we could basically see that about those, about that photo. And then in the second photo, let's talk about the second photo. Or actually, let's talk about the third photo. So in the third photo, we can see, it looks like there's a lot of students or something. So it looks like maybe there's students. It looks like maybe there's like a teacher. It looks like they're looking at some sort of presentation, maybe. So we have students and a teacher, or some sort of presenter. So a presenter is a person who gives a presentation. So that's great. Also, they're in some sort of room. So it looks like maybe they're in a university or something, right? And we might call this sort of room a lecture hall. So either a lecture hall or yeah, definitely a lecture hall. And it looks like they're doing in-person classes. They're doing in-person classes as opposed to, say, online or distant learning. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, so they're all there. They all have their desks, and they're listening, maybe listening to a presentation. All right, perfect. So, yeah, so now that we have some basic vocabulary about how to talk about these things, about these pictures, let's sort of focus in on the two questions. So the two questions were, I'm going to copy and paste them. There we go. So how might these activities be done differently in the future, and how might people benefit from the changes? All right, so let's talk about maybe number one again. So we're going to talk about number one. So how might basically operations be done in the future? So, well, like for one thing, maybe they might involve more technology, right? Maybe they're done remotely, so from a distance. Obviously, yeah, so if you're done remotely, maybe the surgeon is sort of, I don't know, far away, using a computer or like a telephone to sort of view the operation, and maybe they're manipulating or telling other people what to do, or manipulating robots to do it. So maybe using robots, that could be something. Maybe they use artificial intelligence, which could potentially become really, really key for example, doing diagnosis, for diagnosing illnesses, etc. So yeah, potentially using robots to do the surgeries, maybe controlled by doctors or surgeons remotely, so that could be something. And yeah, artificial intelligence, diagnosing illnesses and other ailments. And then maybe potentially also there might be, new cures, right? New cures, new medicines. Also, just in general, a lot of medical technology is constantly improving, right? So new, more advanced medical technology, maybe better scans. So if you scan the body, they would be able to like look inside. So scans, maybe better tools, right? Just better medicine, yeah. So lots of changes potentially. So how might these activities improve? Oh, maybe I'll put these here. There you go. There's our questions. Okay. Yeah, so how might... Right, so how might these activities be different in the future? Okay, and then maybe this one, so for number 3... So that is going to be, so how might operations be done differently in the future? So this is really like how might school be done in the future? So, and again, if you have any ideas, throw them out there. We're going to add them to our list. But for example, maybe there are no more face-to-face classes, right? And we definitely saw during COVID that people, remote teaching has definitely was really popular during COVID. It hasn't really gone away. A lot of people are still doing what we call hybrid classes, right? So maybe hybrid class models will be used instead, or maybe everything will be just online. That's a real possibility. Maybe also there's more use of artificial intelligence, right? We've been seeing lately with, like, what is it called? Chat GPT or whatever, that it's really good at sort of tailoring and customizing content for different uses. So for example, maybe artificial intelligence will be used more for creating and tailoring lessons that are student maybe specific. So yeah, so that could definitely be something. Maybe customize classes and customize programs might be the norm in the future. Yeah. So also, obviously, maybe more use of video, for example. That could be something. Also, putting all the material online instead of using hard copy, what we would call hard copy textbooks. So instead of hard copy material, so hard copy would be like, books. Or I guess my thing is here. Paper. Yeah, so those might be things that will change. And then how might people benefit from these changes? So lots of great benefits. Again, talking specifically about picture number 1 first. So how might people benefit from the changes in medicine? So for example, maybe, one benefit of remote working could be, doctors and specialists could do their jobs from anywhere. Maybe also the diagnoses become more accurate, right? So maybe there's like less mistakes that are done because people obviously make mistakes. Maybe robots, maybe artificial intelligence or medical technology can be a bit more accurate there. Maybe they could also catch problems earlier, right? So earlier detection. So that would be great. Maybe also less errors, right? So people sometimes make mistakes. And then maybe also that could lead to less complications. So a complication would be maybe something negative that happens as a problem. So a complication is basically a technical way that, or a technical refers to a problem. It's a problem that happens with a medical procedure. Yeah. So that could definitely happen, right? And then how about for learning? So I guess one thing could be maybe more access, and so students can learn from anywhere, right? So that could be something. Also, maybe learning becomes more affordable, since obviously, you don't have to go there, you don't have to travel, right? Like no travel. Don't have to pay for accommodations, right? So, when you're a student and you have to travel for school, you always have to find a place to live and everything like that. So this would totally be different, right? Also, maybe, like we talked about customized learning, right? So maybe you could like adapt for different styles of learning, right? So some people learn really well through, speaking, or other people learn really well through visuals. Some people learn really well through reading and things like that. Some people learn well through like doing and touching, and so there's lots of different ways to learn, a lot of different ways things become memorable. So we could really adapt it, right? And then also maybe adapt learning for, disabilities, or other challenges, right? So that could be something too, making learning a lot more accessible. Yeah. So now that we have some ideas about how to talk about these pictures, again, we always need to be comparing and contrasting, right? So some ideas, for example, we could sort of put together two ideas. So like while and whereas could be used to connect two contrasting ideas in a single sentence. So for example, maybe let's see, education might become more personalized, whereas, I don't know, whereas medicine technology might be a lot more accurate, and maybe it will meet the needs of the patients better. Or we could use phrases like on the other hand, or however. So, for example, on one hand I see this in this photo, while on the other hand, in the other photo, this is going on. And then we also want to use a lot of, comparative and superlative adjectives. So for example, this one job would be more stressful or less stressful, for example. So using like more or less with multi-syllable words. So stressful, that has two syllables. Manual labor is a lot harder on your body than other jobs. So here you can see we just added the ER onto the word, since it's just like a one-syllable word. Or also, a university lecture would be more, the most interesting task. So here we can see a superlative. So it's the most interesting, the best, the most, yeah, fantastic. So yeah, so we want to use those sort of like that sort of language. So I have another little task for us all to do really quickly. I've put together sort of a really quick demo sort of response to this, and we're just going to take a second to fill in these gaps together. So we'll give you all maybe like 20 seconds to look at that, and I'll number these actually, because I didn't. Right. All right, so let's go over these really quickly. I'll start reading, we'll check as we go. So, in the photo on the left, we can see people in what appears to be an operating room, while in the bottom photo, there is a classroom of some sorts. So I think in the future, medical procedures might be done by robots, and they might require, so here, more advanced technology, so more advanced because advanced has it's like multiple syllables. So due to this, diagnosis might become, and again, similar to advanced, more accurate, more precise. Also, since surgeons could work remotely, patients might be able to receive care from anywhere around the world. On the other hand, technology might make learning easier. So these short, like one syllable or short two-syllable words typically have an ER ending, so easier for students. Someday all classes might be tailored specifically for the students. I think people will become, and again, healthier as a result of advances in medical technology, while students might become more educated and smarter as a result of improvements in education. All in all, both of these fields will improve dramatically in the future. Yeah, so if you got all of these, great job. Super great job. A lot of students make these kind of mistakes, so it's really important to get this kind of language down, especially since you'll need it on your exam. And it's just helpful anyways, because, you know, we tend to compare and contrast things in real life as well, so this language is really useful for us. Yeah, and then finally, you know, like I said, after you do this activity, your partner or there'll be a follow-up question, and usually that's like it's like about like what's like the best thing, or what do you think about this, what for you is the most interesting thing. So here maybe what sector might see the biggest changes, and so we would have about 30 seconds maybe 40 seconds to respond. So which sector might be the biggest change or changes? So again, right, we're going to answer, give a reason, and then maybe an example. So for example, what sector might see the biggest changes? Well, I guess that medicine would see the biggest changes because, you know, medical technology is already always changing at a really quick pace. I mean, for example, look at all the recent developments we've seen over the past, 10 or 20 years. So much has changed in medicine, and there's so much money and research put into medicine. So I think it will just continue this way, and because of that, we'll see huge changes in this field. Yeah, so maybe something like that could be a way to sort of answer this question. All right, so they put a lot of money, a lot of funding, a lot of resources into medicine, so obviously that would give like the biggest changes. All right, so we're just going to wrap up really quickly. I wanted to leave you all with a few sort of phrasal verbs, because I promised some phrasal verbs. So let's just look at these really quickly. So one common thing we would say to maybe look forward to something. And usually if we look forward to something, we're really anticipating it, we're excited about it, we want it to happen. So for example, I might say I'm looking forward to my summer vacation, or I'm looking forward to my trip overseas. So anytime I'm looking forward to something, that's a really good thing. And just a reminder, because this to here it's like a preposition part of this. It's like this is a set phrase, and because this preposition is here, if we're going to put a verb after it, that verb actually needs the ing form. So for example, I'm looking forward to taking some time off. So I'm looking forward to taking some time off. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I'm looking forward to speaking with you. Anytime we have a verb after look forward to, it's always going to be the ing form. All right, so that's a really important detail on that one. We might also plan ahead for something. So if you have an event coming up, or maybe you have something that you want to do in your future, obviously you would make sort of plans and set things up in advance. So here you would like basically do that preparation. So you plan ahead for something. So we need to plan ahead for our upcoming project, or I need to plan ahead for the next week. Yeah. So in any case, we're going to put in the work, we're going to sort of do the thinking now in anticipation for what's coming up. We might also set aside something. So if you set aside something, you're basically taking part of something, so maybe part of some money, part of some food or something, and you are like reserving part of it for the future. So for example, you might set aside some money into a bank account, you would save it in case something happened in the future. Or you could also set aside some time, like in this example. So I need to set aside some time for studying this weekend, or I'm putting some money aside for university next weekend or next year. Yeah, so you're taking something and you're putting it, or sorry, I'm setting some money aside. Yeah, you're taking it and you're like storing it away. Yeah, and like I said too, actually, You could also say to put aside something. So also, that's like a synonym. We could also take on something. So maybe, for example, you would typically take on responsibility. So if you got like a new job, for example, we would typically take on a responsibility for something in the future. So I'm excited to take on responsibility for my new role, or I'm looking forward to taking on the manager role at my job. So here we're taking on a role. So to take on a role, take on responsibility. So in the future, you're going to take care of either that position or that responsibility, that job. We could also hold off on doing something, which is sort of another way to say that we're going to delay something. So for example, let's hold off on making a decision here. You can see here. And again, because we have a preposition here, if we're going to put a verb here, it's going to have that ing form. So I need to hold off on making a decision, or we decided to hold off the wedding. So there we're going to delay it, or we're going to hold off on buying the house. So there you can see again another ing form. But yeah, here another way to say you're going to delay something, you're going to postpone something. I think we already talked about to plan out something a little bit here. But yeah, you might plan out something too. That means to like go and figure out sort of the steps it takes to do something. So that's a little different from planning ahead. So here you're kind of like sort of like thinking, but here it's a bit you're planning out more concrete steps. So let's plan out the details of our trip, or I'm trying to plan out a project at work. So, I'm trying to figure out all the steps that are necessary for completing the project, basically. So you plan something out, you're figuring out the steps you need towards that goal. And then finally we can work towards something. So maybe you have a big goal, a big thing you want to do in the future. You would make progress towards that goal. You would take steps towards achieving that goal. So we would say that you work towards a goal. So here we say I'm working towards having enough money for a new computer. And again, we have that ing form, because believe it or not, towards is also a preposition. I know there's lots of them that are prepositions that don't really look like prepositions, but this one counts as well. So I'm working towards having enough money for a new computer, or I'm working towards saving up for, working towards having money for a new house, or working towards buying a new house. There we go. Working towards doing something. It's always going to be. All right, great. So yeah, so lots of helpful ways that we can talk about the future, plan for the future. It's very exciting talking about the future. So really great. All right, so I'm just going to wrap up really quickly. Thank you so much for coming out today. I really appreciate having you here. This lesson is really interesting, so thanks so much for listening to it. If you're looking for more resources about how you could get speaking English, get improving your English for your exams, you're more than welcome to check me out on Facebook. There's also lots of Telegram groups where I share lots of information for students there. You're more than welcome to check them out. Also, I have the daily speaking prompt activity on our general account, so you could definitely go there for an opportunity to have something to talk about every day. And of course, I'm also available for lessons, sessions of conversation practice. And in the future, I'm hoping to do more group classes as well. So thanks so much for checking out this live. I'm going to be doing another one in 2 weeks, and we're going to check out part 3 and part 4 questions for this exam. And we're also going to be talking about the future again. So it should be really great. And I look forward to seeing you there for it. All right. Thanks so much, everyone.